This is the Letters in Black and White series of the Dissidents Podcast. The following is the fifth in a series of podcast conversations with interesting people on the topic of race in America. Today's guest is Samuel Hayes III, a Chief Facilities Officer at the College of William and Mary. Sam was responsible for connecting Wink to his Twyman deep roots via the magic of genetic genealogy. Can genetic genealogy bring us together across the color line? Can truth and reconciliation be found at the outer limits of fourth and fifth cousins on 23andMe, Ancestry.com, and Gedmatch? Welcome to a master expert who can teach us how we bear the same DNA, whether we are black or white in the South.
Welcome to the latest in our series of podcast discussions about our upcoming book. Jennifer Richmond, my co-author, and I are publishing a book on May 23rd, 2023 called Letters in Black and White, a new correspondence on race in America. And I'm delighted to have as our guest today someone that I met, I think in 2017, 2018, 2016, something like that. A gentleman reached out to me on 23andMe, who was a fifth cousin and related to me through my mother. And I was intrigued, and he was intrigued, and we had a chance to exchange notes about genealogy. And he was impressed with my grandmother's grandfather, Daniel Brown, born in 1833 to 1885. Long story short, the fifth cousin is Sam Hayes III. He's a resident of Virginia, as am I. We're kind of the same generation, roughly, born in the early 1960s. We also have a unique connection to the University of Virginia. Wahoo wah, I graduated from there, and I believe he's the proud dad of a UVA graduate. And so that's neat. And we actually got together at the Jefferson Hotel for brunch a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. But I'm excited to have Sam on the show for several reasons. Reason number one, we share a love for genetic genealogy. And because of Sam's outstanding epic research, I was able to open the door on a whole cast of distant Twyman cousins I was not aware of at all before my birthday in the year 2016. And that was purely due to Sam Hayes. So the universe, if you ever need help with genetic genealogy, finding lost distant cousins of another race, Sam is your man. I repeat, Sam Hayes III is your man. Number two, we share also a common heritage. We both came of Black American experiences in Virginia, and we're related. And that's important because, like it or not, race matters in the public square. And while we've had several cousins of mine who are Twymans, they all are of the same ethnic group. They're all white Americans. And it's good for us to have some diversity, if you will, in our podcast series. Sam is laughing for those who can't see Sam. And number three, I'm delighted to have Sam because I live by a creed, and so does Jennifer. You can disagree without being disagreeable. And I live by that. That's like, to me, that's second to do unto others as you have others do unto you, the golden rule. So with that, that prelude, that introduction, that profuse admiration for all that he is, welcome to our podcast, Sam.
Thank you.
So Sam has been reading our book, and
Yes.
you know Sam. Obviously, this is my first time. Well, it's my second time meeting Sam, but first time in a recording with Sam.
Right.
So Sam's experience, and this is what I love about this conversation, is we say that you say in the book there's 40 million Black Americans, 40 million different life experiences. And Sam, after reading our book or while reading our book, his life experience is very different than yours. And so, Sam, you had started to tell me a little bit about that. Did you want to, kind of start at the beginning where, how you grew up, what was different, and how that our book not resonates, but where the tension is with what Wink and I write about with your experiences?
So a number of the things that, as I read your book, so Wink and I have spent quite a bit of time offline texting back and forth about some of the issues that I had with the book. And so some of the worldview, and one reason why is that I grew up in Roanoke, and I came from a family where we didn't have the land. We didn't have, like, my my grandfather, grew up in a situation where in 1910 he lived in a household with about 17 other people, and it's only a 2-room house. And so he told me he had to quit school in the 4th grade to eat because he got tired of starving. I talked about, I didn't talk about this, but on my mother's side of the family, and we're related actually on my mother's side of the family as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that side is a little bit different because my great-grandfather was a tenant farmer, and he moved from place to place to place. And in the 3rd grade, my grandmother said she got tired of him yanking her out of school. So she quit school in the 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, your parents allowed you to do that? She says, yeah. And so we don't have the legacy of land and family and everyone living on the same block and all that goes with that. I have the story of the house that I grew up in being redlined 2 years earlier from my uncle, my mom's brother. And they told him if he wanted to move in that neighborhood, and this is the way they talk. My mother described just like this: the race line had not moved yet in Roanoke. And so he couldn't live there unless he asked for the permission of all the white folks in the community. And he said, absolutely not, I'm not doing that. So he moved to another neighborhood that was 5 blocks over, but the same street level. So we lived in the 2200 block of Stanton. He moved on to the 2200 block of Mormon Avenue. And so and then of course in Roanoke, there was a huge urban renewal project that just totally wiped out the Black community. And they talked about it being like urban blight, but it was where some of the most prominent Black folks lived in Roanoke as well, and they wiped them out too. And so my story is more about watching the things that you hear about, redlining and FHA loans, that I found out that my parents were the youngest ever to get an FHA loan, but what I did not know was that them being Black, it was tied to that as well. And so there are a lot of things that happened in my life that, and I'll freely admit that as a Black man, I've been fortunate that a lot of things that others have went through, I did not. I was fortunate. And so there's a part of me that has to give back because I didn't experience some of those things. So I want to pull up as many as I can. And in Roanoke, when you go back and study the history of Roanoke, it's treacherous on how they treated Black folks. And even to this extent where my grandfather had a neighbor who used to do work for the city of Roanoke at night because they didn't want the citizens to know that a Black man was fixing sidewalks. So they made him work at night underneath the light. So you hear these stories, you see these stories, you live these stories. Yeah, I like Wink. I didn't play sports. I was an intellectual kid. And I used to go to the library every day. And I probably read half the books in that space. So Wink, as I read your story, there are a lot of things that I resonate with as I read them. The uplift. My grandfather did not get his first car till he was 70 years old. And started driving.
Okay.
His first car, he was 70. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of things as I read, I connect with, but then there's a part of me, because of my life story being that I've seen the other side of it, that I like, yeah, I understand that, but I can't walk away from it. And my like, I'll tell you this is that, and I told Wink this, that I feel like I've got another 3 or 4 years left in corporate America. And then once I get out of that, I'm going to speak.
You should write a book, Sam. You should write a book.
Yeah, that's what my wife said too. And there's a lot of things that I could take. There are a lot of things that, and Wink, I told Wink this too. I read the disclaimer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love the disclaimer because, I had the opportunity to sit down with brunch and meet his wife, Skylar, and have a conversation with her. And, they didn't have Jack and Jill in Roanoke we grew up at, because the population was not there. The Roanoke didn't have what I call a educated population. That the folks that went to school actually were either school teachers or they were, some of them, that was it. My mother had a guy she went to high school with who actually went to Howard University, majored in civil engineering, came back to Roanoke. He couldn't get a job, so he opened up a business to put in floors, because that's all life offered him. And as I think about my own mom, she only had three options: either get married, get a job working as a domestic, or working in someone's dietary place. And so she would tell us this, but she would also do stuff like, she took speech in high school, and she had me at 19, my sister at 20, got married at 18. And so she would make sure that we spoke correctly. So I don't have the Southern accent from where I came from because of our mom, because she always, like I said last time, she would take us to the richest white neighborhoods and say, you can live like this. But at the same time, she would say, this is a white man's world, you got to live in it. So she gave us the balance and the dichotomy of navigating the 60s and the 70s. And one thing I told Wink about, we were discussing our experiences with integrated schools and segregated schools, and how I started out school in an integrated environment, and I was put into a segregated environment where every day the principal would allow the students to take 16-ounce fruit punch containers and throw them at our buses as we drove off, and she did never stop it. And so my mom, we were traumatized. So she changed our address to her mother's address, which is 4 blocks away, so we could go back to our regular school.
So let me make sure I understood that story right. So you went to an integrated school.
Starting out,
and the white kids were allowed to throw juice cans at a bus that was primarily Black children.
So what happened was, in the 4th grade, they came in and carved our neighborhoods up. And so they sent Black kids everywhere. So basically the kids I grew up with in the next block went to another school.
Yeah, okay.
And so then we had to go to the school that was all white, and then they sent the 2 busloads of Black kids in there, and they terrorized us, and the principal allowed it to happen.
Okay.
I remember in particular, we had a party for our teacher, and we only knew about the day of the party because they didn't include any of the Black kids to bring in anything. I mean, it was these kind of things that I experienced firsthand, and I didn't understand this stuff because we were like the second Black family in our neighborhood, and I watched the white families move out. And so I'm witnessing this stuff firsthand about redlining, about white flight, about all these things. So it gives me a different worldview.
Yeah. Yeah, Wink, I would love to hear your feedback on that. But just to interject, I was editing a podcast that we did with one of Wink's nieces, and we were talking about, she had chosen to live in a Black only dorm, and we were talking about that, and Wink said, well, you know what, Wink, I don't know if you remember saying this, he related that to, he grew up in an all Black environment, and he felt like, I think maybe that was a foundation that he had that gave him a certain worldview as he went into the world, because he kind of had that very secure foundation. Wink, would you agree with that?
Jen, that is the segue of the month. That is excellent. That's excellent. That is just stupendous. I grew up in an all Black world until the age of 7. Everyone was Black. Everyone on Twyman Road was Black. In fact, we were all blood kin. Think about it. The very school I went to was a school attended by my dad and my grandma. My first grade teacher was friends with my grandma. My first grade teacher attended my church, founded by my grandma's grandfather, Daniel Brown. So in many ways, at that impressionable age, from 0 to 7 years old, race was out of the equation for me, Sam. And that maybe that was a blessing. I mean, nowadays we see how horrible Jim Crow segregation was and the pitfalls, but I can tell you, when you're forming your psychological sense of self, right? When you're forming who you are, how you navigate the world, I always had a sense that the larger world was me and I was the larger world, because all of the big people in my life were relatives: grandma, dad, mom, Uncle Robert Daniel, Uncle James Scott, Uncle Valerdes, Uncle William, Aunt Charlotte, Aunt Juanita, Cousin Tony, Cousin Todd, Cousin Bruce, all Twymans. And so if the biggest people, if the giants in your life, when you're 5 and 6 years old, are not just Black, but family, I think that gives you a certain psychological armor. Would you agree with that, Sam? I think it gives you a certain self-esteem.
No question. I mean, we went to Black church, and the thing about our church is, this is interesting. Our pastor of the church went on to become the first Black mayor of Roanoke.
Dr. Taylor, Reverend Taylor,
Yes. So
Taylor.
Dr. Taylor
Yes.
baptized me when I was 9, and Dr. Taylor married me and my wife.
One of my heroes.
Yes. So basically, I was exposed, and so the Sunday school teachers mostly were educators in the city school system. So we had the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
And our church had what I call the premier Black people. And so as a kid, our church was 1 block away from Black Roanoke that had it was First Street, Henry Street, where there's a guy named Oscar Michaud, who actually was a film writer and a movie producer back in the 1920s, and he started in Roanoke. So I was exposed to this stuff, and then urban renewal came and wiped out those things that, like the Dumas Hotel, like all the Black stars would come and stay there when they came to Roanoke, and so I was exposed that, so here it was as a kid going to a Black church. The next street over was Blackness. You saw Black people, and then you saw one of the things I think you talked about, I don't know if in the book or not, that as integration came along, so many of the Black businesses went out of business because we kind of felt it was better to go on the white folks. And so then you start I'll tell you this right now. I agree with you that you having that foundation and me having that foundation, it was very beneficial to me. Seeing I remember a place called Jack and Jill. They served ice cream. There was a place called Charlie's Shop. I used to get my hair cut on the yard, and so I saw thriving Black businesses, and then I saw them as I grew up. Go away.
And so to answer Jen's story, so when I encountered desegregation at the tender age of 8 years old in the 3rd grade, it was like I had been transported to another country, because now I was the only Black kid in my class, and my classmates were all white. And we're not talking whites from Berkeley or whites from Cambridge. You're talking Southern, unreconstructed people who've never seen any Black person before on an equal level. It was a traumatic experience. There's a young writer, I was talking about this actually 2 days ago, whether or not I should one day undergo hypnosis to recall all of those repressed memories about the slurs and epithets and all that. But you know what? I decided ultimately it doesn't make sense. I'm 61 years old. And what I did was in the 3rd grade one day, and it's in the book, I just sat down and just thought, what's going on here? Why are these people calling me names? There's no correlation between intelligence and skin color. The big giants in my world, until this crazy grade, were all Black. Uncle Robert Daniel, Uncle Scott, Grandma, Lucille Walker, Dorothy. And so when you have that sense of who you are, then it just kind of makes you think, I just decided they weren't very intelligent, that they were dumb, that they were equate skin color with intelligence. And so that gave me a self-definition to build upon as I navigated in the larger world. And so from that point on, I never allowed myself to be defined by others, because people who loved me, who meant the most to who meant the world to me, had already defined me at the age of 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I think that was a turning point in my life, Jen, I think.
So Jen, I want to add something. So this is what clouded me a little bit. So I had 2 grandfathers that didn't know who their dads were. And the trauma that went along with them. My Hayes grandfather having a white father, and we used to think that my mother's father also had a white father because he had red hair, freckles, and blue eyes. But we found out later he was just biracial, but we found the family line. I just to this day have not figured out exactly who his father was. And so the trauma of the way they were raised, and then my mother's father, not only that, his mother died when he was 6 years old of breast cancer. So he had no father, mother died, raised by a grandmother who had maybe 9 kids and lost 7 of them. And so the trauma that was produced in him that got passed on to us
Mhm.
And then my other grandfather, with the anger of his mother leaving him at the age of 6 and coming back when he's 11 or 12, the stability that Wink has, I didn't have that. I mean, my grandfather did all he could do with his own set of kids, but you're still carrying that in your that trauma in your DNA. Now the women, like my grandmothers, a little bit different. You know, their dad, his moms, you know, they knew they were, but then my grandparents on my mom's side, they got separated after being married 40 years. And then on my father's side, my grandmother's father died in his early 40s, and he had 9 children. He left that his wife to raise, and so she actually moved from the coal mines in West Virginia back to Roanoke to live in a community where she had no family. And so all of this got compounded.
Sure.
So see, when you have that stability, man, and that's the one thing that I try to always proud for my own kids. I don't want them to know,
Here.
and I think it made a lot of difference.
Now, if I might add something, Jen, someone who's
Yeah.
very famous once said, no matter how bright you are, everyone is blind to 100% of reality, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
No one sees all of reality. And I just want to quickly add, and I thank Sam for sharing those intimate stories of personal trauma. Of course, there's trauma in my extended family. We're not unique from other families. We're unexceptional. For example, let me get it straight, my great-grandfather, that's right, my great-grandfather, Twyman, I think that's right. Yeah, my great-grandfather was a mean man, a vicious man. And it's in the book, I take no pride in him being my namesake ancestor. He was so horrible that one day his sons, they were digging a well. He was a ditch digger by trade. They were digging a well, and they just left his sorry tail in the bottom of the well for a few days to teach him a lesson. That's deep. That's deep. And that's a lesson I learned from my Uncle Robert Daniel, but I never internalized that as like trauma for me. It was kind of like a historical story from the past, if that makes sense. So there was trauma, but it wasn't something I internalized because it wasn't me. It happened in the 1890s. Second example, and this is not something I've shared a lot, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but I'm aware that an important ancestor of mine told a tale. She created a narrative. She created a story. And I suspect she created a story because there was a certain stigma attached with certain things in the 1930s, in the Great Depression. So growing up, all of my cousins were told X. This is how we came into existence as a family. It's a great story, very life-affirming, made you feel special and good. Only within the past several months did I had a suspicion the story wasn't really all true. I did too much research for my own good, Sam, as you can appreciate, and I discovered that the truth, the real story, was not the fable we've been told. But I think this ancestor did a good thing to protect us because then we never had that big part of ourselves. What do you think about that, Sam? Is it sometimes good for an ancestor to create a story or a fable for the greater good of the children and grandchildren? What do you think?
I think, I mentioned this before, that when we first mentioned to my grandmother about doing this on my mom's side, she said, stay out the grave. And so there were a lot of things that took place, but I think that this is just me looking back.
Sure.
I prefer to have the whole truth unvarnished than have a story to protect me and then found about it as an old man that it wasn't true.
Oh, that's deep, Sam. That's deep. That is deep. That's deep.
I want to jump in here because there's another question that you both love DNA. And Sam, you just said something before Wink's question that we actually talk about in the book about trauma and it being passed down. And Wink and I go back and forth on this, like whether or not trauma can be passed down literally through your DNA, not just through, I argue that trauma can be passed down in the way you grow up and what you see and what how you live and how your parents are.
And the stories you're told. The stories you're told.
But I also mentioned that, I question, can trauma be brought down through your DNA as well? And we completely rejected that idea.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your point of view.
So this is why I think trauma can be passed down. So as I said, that when I talk about the white DNA that I possess from my Turner side, it's not slavery at all. It's a direct connection.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no slavery trauma for me on that side. But what I found out was that I came out of a family of alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is that the white side of our family were alcoholics. And so the trauma that went along with this, and then some of them told me stories of how the one lady in particular, my first DNA cousin, the one that shows up, she told me about how her father's father was taken from the home, and he was told, "Don't come back here. You caused too much damage here." And then she told me about her father. And so the reason why I believe trauma can be passed on is the same way the fact that I started taking high blood pressure medication at 35 years old. I was a very healthy person, but this is what it is. And so if diseases can be passed along, then so can psychological things as well. And so this is the thing though, Jen, is that then once we know this, we have a responsibility what we do with it. So I never drank because I knew that I would open up a door.
Mm-hmm.
But the trauma was there because of the behaviors of how, say, my grandfather dealt with his 11 kids, and he would like we were talking about this last week when I visited my 87-year-old aunt. If my grandfather was watching 60 Minutes, the house had to be silent. You could not interact with him if that was going on, or Face the Nation. And so I personally think that the trauma of him growing up in a household where he had no control as a child informed how he operated toward his family. My mother's father was the same way. He was a weekend alcoholic. During the week, he never touched it, but man, he was not a nice guy. He was always grouchy, and you couldn't interrupt him watching the news. And so so I believe the trauma of him losing his mom, not having his father, and then, being, you got this black kid with red hair, freckles, blue eyes, and like, well, who's your father? Where he literally made up a father when he got married to my grandmother on his marriage license, and he made up another father when he got his railroad retirement Social Security application. And so that's what I believe about trauma, that it can pass on in behaviors. I can tell you some stuff that he did, and you're like, really? So that's why I feel that way.
Well, I wouldn't, if I can join in, I wouldn't use the word trauma in my family. In my case, I would just use a genetic predisposition. So, for example, I'm aware that there's a white Twyman who was notorious. He murdered a brother and then escaped out of the state of Virginia to escape prosecution. So that's a pretty antisocial thing to do, right? So that guy is probably an ancestor of my Twyman namesake, who was so mean that he was left at the bottom of a well for a few days. And then I have close cousins who have been very sociopathic, shall we say. They've acted in ways that are very dysfunctional, to the degree that my close dear cousin, I won't mention her name, but she used to say when we were growing up, we Twymans are just dysfunctional. We're just dysfunctional people. And she said that, I think, because she saw echoes of that genetic predisposition over the generations to act in antisocial ways. And I even see that in relatives to this day. But having said that, I think sometimes the noble ancestor will say, I don't really want my children and grandchildren to carry this weight in their soul. So I'm going to create a different story that they can carry in their soul to explain why things are the way they are, and that will empower them. In a way, the stories we tell ourselves are the stories that give us meaning and purpose in life, right? So if you tell your children and grandchildren, hey, look, you're nothing but the descendants of a mean man left at the bottom of the well, well, that's going to give you one mental impression. If you tell your descendants a different story, well, due to forces beyond his control, X happened to him, and so on, then you can more understand it, and it doesn't become a weight on your soul. It's the classic, Malcolm Gladwell once said he could spot a West Indian within like 5 seconds, because West Indians lack a certain weight on their soul that American native Blacks don't have. And I think that's what he was getting at. The stories we tell ourselves. West Indian Blacks tell themselves positive, strong self-esteem stories. In fact, Sam, you'll laugh at this. On several occasions, it might be in the book, maybe not, total strangers that come up to me and ask me, "Are you Jamaican? Are you from the West Indies?" Because they look at me and my views and attitudes, and it doesn't seem to conform with the weight of trauma, you used the word trauma, that American descendants of slavery tend to have. So I think in some ways, maybe the ancestor I'm thinking of created such a positive story that it made us more like West Indians in psychology than Native Black Americans in American slavery. What do you think about that?
I
It's a deep
struggle with
question.
that because, I struggle with that, and I'm gonna tell you why.
Sure.
So one of the things that as you know, that when I went to engineering school, and by the time I got into my major set classes, I was the only Black person in that class.
Mhm.
And what happened is that none of the white kids would befriend me. And so I ended up having to be friends with people that were from another group of people. And I didn't internalize that as much as it was a fact. And it helped me understand what I was up against. I think for me, and this is just my personality,
Sure. Right.
that I prefer to know the whole unvarnished truth.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my grandfather, like it's really interesting when I go talk to my aunts, like this past weekend when I was back in Roanoke, and they know nothing. And so I know more than they know about their dad. And so what his worldview was, let's not talk about that stuff. It's too painful for me.
Right.
So the best thing I can do is not, he didn't make any stories up. He just didn't tell any stories, which is
the same
another
thing.
derivative of
Right.
that. So instead of having that nice, cool narrative, it was like he didn't say anything. And so I asked them questions, and it's like gaps in the family because nobody knows anything. And so with me, they get excited. I sat there with them for 3 hours talking about our family.
Yes.
And they were so excited just to know about who we came from, who we're connected with, going back to Jamestown.
Yeah, right.
And I will say this to you as I read your book. There is a certain embracement that I have made of those people that are related to me. The one thing, Wink, that I do regret is I don't know more about my Black side. I know about these white people, but I wish I knew more about my great-grandmother or the ones that came off the plantations, what kind of people they were, what was their resilience like? Like interesting, I'll tell you the story they told me when I was in Roanoke last week, is that my grandmother cousin was my father's cousin was at the house. And he said that when he was a kid, they used to use the word bloody and chap and all this kind of stuff. And so what I found out was that the slave owners moved to America in 1849, and they were around them. And when I'm taught my great-great-grandmother, needlepoint, all this kind of stuff. And so it was that type of piece of the family, which I did not know until last week, just having conversation.
Wow.
Well, Sam, I've got a question for you. I hear your stories, and I hear that they're different than Wink's. And this is one of the things that I struggle with in the book and with Wink is, we could go 1,000 years from now and we can still look back and say America, engaged in slavery, and that is a horrible thing. Jim Crow, it's a sad mark on America's history. What can we do from your perspective, as not we being white or Black, but we as people, as a nation, where we can reconcile, reconstruct, what is it that, I mean, I know lately one of the big things that people have been doing, this is how Wink and I started writing, was like these DEI trainings, right? And you're trying to get people to be more sensitive and more understanding of different histories. And I actually I'm okay with that. But the way they've been doing the DEI training, the one that I went to in particular, it's not making things better. It's just flipping, Wiki and I talked about this the other day. It's just flipping the script. So instead of it, like back, pre-civil rights, where there was just, ubiquitous racism, very clear, and white people only saw blacks as the color of their skin and identified them with certain traits because of that. We flipped the script. And when I went to this diversity training, instead of like me learning about slavery or learning about, history or learning about your story of redlining, which is what I went to do, I wanted to know what was a life like for Sam that was different than mine. It was more, it just said, well, how are white people bad? Like, how can we characterize white people? And that's exactly what white people did pre-civil rights and even, after civil rights, of characterizing blacks as only a monolith, one thing, and attributing, ugly caricatures to black people. And now what I see, a lot of the way we're doing diversity is exactly the same, but with white people. That's not to say that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at history. I am all for that. I mean, I went to the class to learn a history that wasn't mine. But I don't think that we are, at the current moment, the way we are trying to resolve our history of slavery, our history of racism, which is something we need to do, I don't think we're doing it in a constructive way where we can, and we touched on this the last time we talked, where we can be authentic with each other, like where you can really sit down and be like, this is how I feel. And I can say that to you too. I feel like we've been silenced from having those conversations. So what, I'm sorry, I said a lot there, but in your estimation, what can we be doing, or what should we be doing? And is there a place where we can sit back and go, okay, slavery will have always been there, but we've made it. We've reknit, this American identity. Is that ever possible?
So let me peel this. This is like a really big onion.
Mm-hmm.
And it has lots of layers. So number one, when you go to a diversity training, if you're going in there to feel like, so this has been my observation with those trainings. Unfortunately, if you don't go in there feeling like you got some culpability to how things are. So for instance, I have a friend, great guy, white guy, has 4 kids. And I said to him, what do you tell your kids about race and stuff? He said, I don't teach them anything because we're not like that. I said, yeah, but you create a vacuum because you're not saying anything, their friends say stuff. And so unless you're counteracting what they're saying and putting up forth a narrative, and it has to be a desire. So you can have reconciliation, but it has to be both-sided. It can't be that the black people want to reconcile back with white folks and the white folks don't want it, or the white people want to reconcile back with the black folks and they don't want it. But I think it boils down to this too, is when we spend time together. Because like I said, I mentor 8 guys and women married, 2 of them are white guys. And I was with one of them no more than Thursday. And we're sitting there having lunch. Our conversations, he's actually writing a senior thesis on George Washington.
Oh.
And so we start talking about my connection to the fact that I'm related to Robert E. Lee's wife, direct connected. And so we start talking about that a little bit. But then you find out that this kid has the same challenges that other kids have. And so I got another kid, he's 18. He's the only child from Michigan. He's a white kid. And so we talk about the deep things about how he feels about being not accepted by friends of friends, or how his parents don't listen to him. And so when we take it to that level and we see each other as people and we engage. And then the other thing too is that I like to say to a lot of white folk that have colonial roots, I'm your freaking cousin. Because if you go back far enough, we're related. And so it's not just you see this brown-skinned guy. Hey, I'm your brown-skinned cousin.
Yeah.
And in Virginia, I mean, it's funny that we we have these conversations, and I always throw out, hey, like Winks went back to the Twymans, like I'm back to the Turners, and I've spent time with my white DNA cousins, and it's been a really cool experience because we feel the family kinship.
Yeah.
Or like I've got probably 45 or 50 white DNA cousins on my Facebook page, and we communicate. Hey, cousin, proud of what your son's doing or whatever. I did that more than this week. So I think it's that desire to want to see each other as individuals. And again, I used to say a bubble, but it's not a bubble. You can say out of a bubble. I see it more as a box with no windows, no doors, and no lights. And all you have is the echo chamber going on. But if you bring others into your sphere. And I think one thing that helped me too is that my mother-in-law was a white lady from England, and she had a different worldview. And you know, my daughter is in England now, and we're going in a couple of weeks, and it's just how she's able to navigate those two cultures. And so, like I said, I see things in duality. I see the individual kid that needs help, but I also see the upward lift of the race, because when the Holocaust was going on, Hitler didn't care about their views. He was just killing people. And so that's how I see it, that we got to have a desire, Jen, to want to be friends with people. When you hear that 75% of white people have nobody in their friend set that's Black or ethnicity, then it's very difficult to have that relationship. Because I know Wink and I were talking this week about his Jewish friends, and I relayed this story to him, and the story was, I met this young man. He's 43 now, and we used to work together in the city of Roanoke, and we used to do lunch together a lot. And so, since he's a conservative Jew and I'm a Christian, we would go to lunch and we would trade off who would pray. So I would pray in English, in Jesus' name, that one week, and then the next week he'd pray in Hebrew. But yet he's an adjunct professor at George Mason University, and he teaches a class on ethics, and I teach every semester for him on servant leadership. And I've been doing this for a number of years, and I think it's because I recognize and respect his Judaism, because he would tell me these stories. He understands about me being a believer, a Christian, and it's that type of one-on-one that gets us places.
I think I've been living that, Sam.
Well, we've been living that.
If I think about it, I mean, well, yeah, I mean,
and
just to go on that line.
Yeah,
exactly. And my outreach to my Twyman cousins,
right,
of course. And in terms of people who happen to be Jewish, my short-term girlfriend at law school was Jewish. My college roommates were Jewish. My law school roommates were Jewish. My little brother, the Big Brother, Big Sister program at UVA was Jewish. My best friend today in San Diego is Jewish. The writer of our afterword is Jewish. So yeah, I think I've been kind of walking that walk, Sam, and not so much talking the talk, which I think is good. I wanted to also agree with you, Sam. I do think that seeing people as individuals is the pathway to the reconciliation Jen talks about. So for example, just if you look at the Twyman family, we're not some mass of people. There's not like conformity. There's always been differences in how people view and understand race. For example, my mother's father, from what my mom told me, quote unquote, had no use for white people. And that struck me as a child of the 70s as a little bit strident and harsh, but given his times, understandable, particularly given stories I've learned as an adult. My mother, unlike your mother, you said your mother said, this is a white man's world. My mom never, ever, ever, never said a thing like that. And I think she was incapable of saying something like that. I think it was her worldview, her personality, her genetic disposition in life. Now, my dad, you would like my dad, Sam, I think. My dad always considered that it was a problem that I was so engaged in the larger world in high school. You read, it's in the book. I wanted to go to Harvard Law School. He wanted me to go to Howard Law School. I said, Harvard's a far better school. He said, you're just acting white. You're just acting white. Howard's a good law school. And my mom turned to my dad and said, are you jealous of your own son? And so that was an example of a conflict in racial vision among my parents. My mom, who literally never said anything that suggested life was constrained by race, versus my dad, He was fond of referring to Johnny Reb and the rebels and the Bird family and how horrible they were. And yes, he was more of a racially conscious man. And so I think for him, there was something kind of strange having a son grew up in the age of desegregation who was happy and successful and had a high aim, because that made his wife very happy, because all she wanted was her son to fulfill his dreams in life. But for my dad, I think he was always suspicious of achievement in the larger world. I think he was always suspicious of, how can my son go to a 3% Black junior high school and be the student leader, or go to an 8% Black high school in Chester and be the student leader? And this is the very school I was bused by when I was in high school to go to the all-Black school, George Carver High School in central Chesterfield County. So I think that those kind of generational tensions are not always presented in diversity trainings. I think it's probably the rare diversity training where a trainer will say, man, we can't view people as one block, because there are all these differences between generations and even between husband and wife. So that's kind of my thinking. Diversity training falls short because it fails to see the individual.
So I got a question for you. Was it your mom that's descended from Daniel Brown, or your dad?
Dad.
Your dad was Daniel Brown?
No, my dad was Winkfield Sr., Jr.
Okay.
Yeah.
But your mom was the one that was descended from Daniel Brown, right?
No, my dad.
Your dad.
My dad is the son of my grandma, Rosanelle Brown Twyman Jackson. Grandma Rosa is the child of Robert Brown, and Robert Brown is the son of Daniel Brown.
So what was your mother's world experience from her parents?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Now, you recall her father, I have no use for white people, quote unquote. So he was definitely someone who did not navigate or desire the larger world. But within his Black world in Pittsylvania County, Halifax County, he was viewed as a patriarch. He had, 14 kids? My mom was the youngest of 14. I think he was a sharecropper. He was very religious. He was like the deacon in his church. He was a tall man, dark-skinned, and very strict. You did not play around with Roger Womack. And if you did, you had to leave the house when you turned 17 or 18. So he was that kind of a person. But, sadly, and this is a good interesting point, Sam, sadly, my mom suffered, to use your word, trauma. I would say a setback. When she was a teenager, her dad died and her mom died. So she was an orphan, and she had to come up to Richmond, Virginia to live with her big brother, Uncle Will, who was a reverend. And my family church was around the block from Uncle Will's house. And that's how my mom met my dad, at the family church. That's the way you do it. That's the way you do it in the 1960s. And then, of course, they got married. And there's this wonderful picture of my dad looking very awkward and shy, holding my mom's hand. They just got married. This is the reception at Grandma's house. And Grandma's looking very sternly at her new daughter-in-law, just to make sure that she toes the party line. So a precious picture. So
it seems like to me, your mother's lived experience informed how she came out of trauma, losing both of her parents. And so her worldview was, okay, I'm not going to limit you. When my mother said white man's world, what she meant was, there's a story behind that. So I used to read a lot of books on slavery, on just Black people's experience. And my mother said, look, you're going to have to navigate this. And so what she did was she prepared me. And it's true. I mean, if you're the only Black kid in your class, in almost every job I've ever had in my life, I've been the first Black person in there, that she prepared me to have to be able to be strong in that. But at the same time, she took us to the richest white neighborhoods and so you can live like this.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I live in a 4,000 square foot house because of my mother giving me permission. The fact that we were Black was irrelevant. She never said, well, you know, this is a nice house, but we Black folks, we can't do this. She never said that. Right. So she gave me the balance that I needed to go into civil engineering, a field to this day is only 5% Black.
Right.
And when you, and you know, and one of the things I marvel at, I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I've been in one for 40 years. And when I go to the meetings in Richmond to this day, I've only been there twice and there's other Black people. Usually I'm the only one there. And so this is the worldview that I have.
Right.
And that's why I go out and I do go to the schools and I do talk to students about engineering, because I say, look, I want to see you doing what I'm doing.
Right.
Period.
Right. Now,
So
Sam, let me talk to you about that, Sam, if I can, Jen, just for a moment.
Okay.
Sam, I used to be very interested in the kind of thing you just talked about, that kind of community outreach with the young kids in local, say, schools, public schools. Yeah, until one moment. I'll tell you what happened that soured me on that experience. I was a law professor, and one of my colleagues said, you know, you should go out to Patrick Henry High School. I'm going to name names, Patrick Henry High School, to talk to these Black students. They had like some kind of a affinity group, a class for just Black male students, and inspire them. Tell them your story. It's important to hear your story, because my colleague thought I was a pretty exceptional, positive, affirming person. So I went to the class and I started to talk and tell my life story. And you know what? They were disruptive. They weren't really listening to me. And I remember one guy just spoke out of turn. He said, "You sound like you're from England. Are you from England, the way you talk?" Because there's this thing called, Sam, code switching. You're supposed to talk one way before an X group, another way before another group. I'm not that way. I talk the same way regardless of who I'm talking with. But to me, the disrespect and the questioning of my roots was so kind of offensive that I just kind of soured on the old idea going forward.
You missed an opportunity, and I'm gonna tell you why.
Tell me why.
For every person that said that to you, there might be a kid sitting in the back that want to hear what you have to say. And you may have made the difference between him making a decision where he's going with the crowd versus, you know what, there's this Black guy that came in here and he's talking like he's from the king, he's the king of England. So what? He's giving me something that I can't get in my house. That's the reason why I do what I do. I don't care about the masses. You know, you talk about the individual, that's who I'm targeting. That one kid.
Sure.
Out of 30.
And see, that's on me, Sam. And I fully accept responsibility. That's on me because of my personality. I am, as Jen knows, an introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceptive person. I'm a highly sensitive person. I really don't tolerate people who are bullies well. Jen knows this. So my rule of life is, if you are a bully, then I don't have time for you, because I don't engage bullies. And so I perceived that as a bullying activity. And I just said, okay, no more, I'm done. I think that's healthy for my sense of self.
It probably is, but you just violated your own rule when you said the 40 million views. Because if you let that one person get in the way of what you were there for, I mean, and you know, that one person might be that one kid that's crying out to you saying, you know what, I'm making it funny, but really I want to be like you because I don't know how to get there. And so I look at it from that perspective, because I've been doing this thing
do you ever get
30
that?
years. And
do you ever get accused of being or talking white or speaking white or acting white?
No, I don't care. I'm an educated person. That's how I'm supposed to talk. Now I can code switch just like the best of them. Okay. And so yesterday I was out with my my team, the bunch of custodial workers, and they were talking about this lady said, you know, they call me the queen. So I took off my safety vest and I put it down in front of her and said, here you are. So we all laughed, we had fun.
Right.
But when I'm speaking in front of them, I'm talking like you, sir, because they know that I'm bringing a certain level of professionalism to who I'm talking to. So they have to accept me as that Black guy that doesn't sound like, now I code switch with my friends, but if I'm giving a presentation, I'm not code switching.
So I want to jump in here. for a minute.
Jump,
Yes.
go, jump in. I've got too many stories.
We're coming up on the hour, and there's a few loose ends for me. First of all, I want to tell you about code switching. It's just a quick funny story. I code switch when I get stopped by the police in Texas, and I turn on my Southern accent because a lot of times it makes them, it's like they hear the same thing that they're talking about. And then
I should try that. I'm going to try that.
We got that connection. And then, it's like, I'm just,
Right.
So that's my only story about code switching. Okay.
So you do it too.
Oh, yeah, that's my, yeah.
All right, then we do what we do to do.
You know who's really good at this, Sam? My son,
Matthew?
The private school graduate,
yes,
and this and that, and the other. He code switches like you don't know what. And so what it says is it doesn't correlate to intelligence. He's the smartest guy in our family by far, but he has mastered the art of code switching. When he's with his brothers in Alpha Phi Alpha, yeah.
Yeah, you have to be smart to code switch. You just can't say stupid stuff because you still have to articulate your position.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, there's one downside to that, Sam, and I'll let Jen jump in. The one downside I don't like, Sam, and I remember an occasion when we were at a sorority celebration of my mother-in-law, and I won't mention the sorority, but I remember my son was supposed to give a short address before these esteemed ladies.
Your mother-in-law must be an AKA. She's not a Delta.
I'm not going to say anything.
I'm just telling you because my wife's an AKA, and I know how your wife is, and she's not coming from a Delta. There right now.
Sam, don't out me. Okay, delete that. Anyway, so my son is excited and he's ready to give these remarks. And he's at our table, he says, I'm going to say X, Y, and Z. And X was like this sophisticated, intellectual, may even been like a French word derivative that we understood. But my mother-in-law said to my son, don't use that word. It's too big in this setting. And I thought that was really bad because you shouldn't have to self-censor yourself when you speak before a Black sorority group. Does that sound bad to say? But my mother-in-law said,
she knew her audience. She knew her audience. And so I think what she was trying to say is if you want to communicate, I call them $10 words. You can use your $10 word if you want to.
Right.
But that's not going to connect with who I'm talking to. So let me use one word that we all can connect with. And so you got to think, if she's with a bunch of older Black women.
Yes.
Okay, so that means that many of them came out of different environments. And so they were more comfortable with that word than say a word that you would use the way you raised your kids.
Like Schadenfreude. We would use that around the house.
I don't know what that means.
See?
I don't. I think you're trying to show off.
That's like.
Do you know, Sam, I taught my daughter that word on purpose. I used to make a habit of teaching my children a new word every week or so, just so they would have a large vocabulary, because I thought that was helpful in life. So anyway, it is.
Back to Jen. Switching. I wanted to pull a thread that Sam mentioned earlier and make one I want to pull a thread and I want to make a comment. I guess that's what I want to say. And then I'll leave it, Sam, to you to kind of close us out with this. One of the things that you said that I thought was so important and that Wink and I did is before Wink and I even started writing, he had me do my DNA, and he had me find my Black cousins and connect with them. And he already did that with his white cousins as well as his Black cousins. And I honestly, when you're asking for alternatives to diversity training, I honestly think that's what I would do, is literally have you find your Black, or if you're Black, you're white, if you're white, you're Black, your cousins, and get to know them. That's diversity training.
That's reparations.
Get to know them one-on-one. I mean, then you shouldn't have to be able to be kin in order to have a real conversation, but to know that you're kin, to know that you are so much more than what you look like here. I honestly think if I were to plan and I think that you were saying this, if I were to say, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fix this problem? It would be literally go find your cousins that don't look like you and get to know them. But so this is my last question for you, based on that, and based on what I think we all agree on. So one of the things that I think is a trend right now, and I started out this conversation talking about how Wink was in his Black family, he was very secure. And so, and I was telling about a niece who decided to live in an all Black dorm, and she was expressing how that was such a great experience for her because she didn't have like Winks growing up. So she got this for the first time. Yeah. And we understood that because Wink had it growing up, she got it for the first time. But here's my question. If we are saying, like I just said, that one of the ways to reconstruct this country in a unifying way is to get to know each other across the color line, is it helpful that we are segregating into Black dorms, white dorms, affinity groups, all these groups that are based solely on the color of our skin and not on our individual personalities or even our interfamilial relationships?
Take it away, Virginia State and VUU.
So from looking at a view of 100,000 feet, the answer would be no. But from being a person that actually is on I'm on the Sidney Lewis board, a business school board at Virginia Union. Virginia Union, of course, is a predominantly Black school. I actually go down to Virginia State and guest lecture usually once a semester. So, and I actually had the opportunity to take a semester at Norfolk State when I was at ODU. Okay. So I'm going to answer it from this perspective. Okay. There is something to be said for being around a bunch of people that you feel comfortable in. Because many times when you are a minority person, and you're not like Wink, because it's interesting that Wink people tended to be mostly Jewish who are already an oppressed group as it was. And so their worldview is always going to be different. If he had came to me and said, all of my friends were white and nobody Jewish who didn't have an understanding, I would say, oh, that's interesting, Wink. But because of the people that he chose to be with that are an oppressed group, because I told him, so I don't have a problem with Black people going to HBCU, because I can tell you this. I felt alone when I was at ODU as the only Black student in my class in engineering. I felt alone when the majority group did not want me to be a part of what they were doing. I think what I do tell the students this, I say, guys, you're in an artificial environment right now. And I told them this when I went to Virginia State and guest lectured to a business class in February this year. And I said, don't allow this comfort you have get in the way of what you're going to face in life, because this is not going to be how it is. This is good that you've got this, but you still got to be prepared and ready to come and be ready to deal with an environment that's not as hostile to you. Even in Women Marry, I mean, there's probably maybe 5 of us that are on my level. And it's different. And so I think it's that piece of, are you willing to reach out and you're seeing someone that doesn't look like you and you just come across and say we're all the same? Well, we need to do the extra, because everybody's not the same. And we got to do those things that make people feel comfortable. We don't have to talk about race, but we can talk about just feelings. Because what they say is, I forgot what you said, I forgot what you did, I never forgot how you made me feel.
Right.
And I think that,
Maya Angelou.
That's it. Mm-hmm. That's a Maya Angelou quote, and it's so true. And so I think you can simultaneously live in an environment, because let's just face it, I go home to a Black family every day. Yeah, though my wife's biracial, she considers herself a Black woman, so I go home to a Black family. But I go to work in an environment, all my direct reports are white. And I've got to be able to navigate both of those and treat my staff how I want to be treated while going home to a Black family. So you can do both.
What happens, Sam, if the wife is, to use your words, a strong Black woman, and the husband is, to coin a phrase, more man of the universe?
Well, you know what?
Ah,
guys
be
been married for
careful.
listen. You guys been married for a very long time.
A long time. Yes.
So it works. And I
does.
think what I'm saying to you is that the one thing I appreciate about my wife is that she knows I'm a mentor. She gives me my space to be me. I give her space to be her. While at the same time, we know we're on the same trajectory. And our plan was, our daughters are 31 and 33.
Oh,
and
wow.
our desire was to raise them in a way that they could succeed in life. That's why the ones in London, the ones up in Northern Virginia, it's a physical therapist. But we were always one in purpose. And I think that's the uniting factor, that we may think about things differently, but as long as our purposes are the same, we're going to be okay.
Skylar would so agree, and I would so agree. From day one, we were always on a mission, and the mission was to raise the best, most productive, the highest achieving kids that we could. So yeah, you're so right. So in a way, Sam, the race stuff is kind of like, we have a luxury good. We have the luxury to worry about such things because the important stuff was always the glue that kept us together.
Yep. So I can say that I've been married to my wife for 35 years, 35 and a half years. We've been together for 37 years. And, when she first told me that her mom was white, I was like, okay. And then I went to her house and met this British lady. I'm like, oh, she's telling the truth.
She's really white.
But I'll tell you this. She's my mother-in-law, and there's nothing, she's been gone 20 years this year.
Yeah.
And I could not have gotten a better person to be my mother-in-law. And my father-in-law was, he's a black guy from Alabama, grew up in Flint, Michigan, but they were just people.
Yeah.
And I was able to get beyond all the outside stuff to see them for who they were.
Have your daughters dated outside the black race?
My younger daughter used to date a guy for 3.5 years who was, he was from Ecuador.
Okay.
So it's funny you bring that up, because my younger daughter sent me this thing about dating a black guy and how difficult it is because it's so few. And I sent this to Wink. Howard University is only 28% male right now.
Which is outrageous. That's outrageous. That could be a different discussion.
You go to Howard University and you send your daughter there to find a spouse that's on the same level as her.
Right.
It's going to be almost impossible.
Right. Well, what's that about, Sam? Just a quick digression. Why is that the case? To me, that's outrageous.
I think that we need people like Wink to reach those boys in elementary school, not in high school. It's too late.
I agree with you.
Elementary school, and say, you know what? If you want to be an attorney or a doctor, you can do this. And I believe that we have to give boys the opportunity to dream. You have to show success. I think, like I always often said, if I was mentoring strictly for success, I would only mentor young ladies because they got it together. And I said it as a girl dad, but I also say that as what I see around the campus that women marry.
Wow.
That you have to give them, boys are different. I'm mentoring these young men, and I can see, like one of them is graduating. He's graduating next week. And so I passed on to another kid who's 2 years younger than him. And they had lunch together. And he told me this. He said, Mr. Hayes, I can see your influence on this young man. I've only been in his life for 1 month. And his mother got really concerned because, like, who is this Mr. Hayes? Is he some kind of weird guy? And so I met him this week.
Right.
And she realized, I just want to see the best for her son. That's it. I don't have no agenda except to see him be his best person. That's it.
As a father, I can attest to what Sam just said. I was so excited about my children. I was planning their future before they were born. In 1991, I remember I was in Alexandria, Virginia at the public library, and we were going to move to San Diego the next year. And I was researching what are the best high schools, the best private high schools for children. We didn't even have kids yet. We didn't have TRIP until 1995, 4 years later. But I knew that you had to plan. And so all two of my kids went to that school I chose 4 years before my first child was born. When my son came home from the hospital for the first night, I read to him not like a little baby, story nap time, I read a treatise on American constitutional law by Larry Tribe, because I figured the more words he hears, the more his brain is going to develop and grow. And as we always talk of our kids as if they were adults. We didn't baby talk to them or talk down to them. And therefore, they were forced to learn words like Schadenfreude and mercurial and other things like that, which I think helps. So I think when you're applying to schools like Stanford or Yale or whatever, that's going to show up in your SAT scores, and you're going to have a sense of presentation about yourself when you meet with admissions directors. So yeah, I agree. You got to think about your kids before they are born. If you're married, take it from me, Wink, you need to be in the library researching the best schools for your unborn children, because you've got a 20-year plan.
Yep.
Before you even see your baby in the hospital. That was my approach, Sam.
So I'm going to end us with this, because this is, I think, what I've gotten from both of you in this conversation is like attraction and how we come together. It's more about what our purpose is and finding a common purpose than the pigment of our skin. So whether it's in marriage or what is our purpose in life, what are our principles, and that's what you found in Skylar.
Oh, that's so sweet. She's gonna love you, Jen.
But no, and that's what we were talking about earlier, just the DNA too. I mean, finding the purpose in a person, finding the principles in the person,
that's true.
As more important than the pigment of the person.
When I was in junior high school, Jen, a teacher came to me and she said, Winkfield, you are a special person. This must have been 7th grade or 8th grade. She said, you're a special person. Make sure you marry a special woman. And that came from my 7th grade teacher. And I remembered that. It stayed in my mind that I needed to not marry some person off the street, but I needed to be very discerning, because who you marry is the most important person in your life when you're an adult. The most important person, not a cousin, not grandma, because she's done her job when you were 5 and 7 years old. When you're an adult, the most important person is who you're going to see in the morning, when you wake up, and when you go to sleep at night. And so I chose Skylar well. I chose her, I mean, this is probably too much information, but for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, attractive as all get out. She was a vision to my eyes when I saw her in the elevator in Capitol Hill. Number 2, she had graduated from Yale, and I had sworn the previous week I was going to marry a Yalie. Serendipity, right? Sam's laughing. And then number three, we were talking about Black history, and she mentioned her last name was Rainey. And I said, because I like Black history, in relation to Congressman Rainey, oh yeah, he was my great-great-grandfather. Bingo, you're my wife.
you got down on your knee right then.
You know, I'll say this, Wink would not be able to be the guy to have his views if his wife wasn't who she was, because it would take a strong Black woman to undergird the fact that you're having a different worldview. You had somebody that did not believe and it was like, okay, it's okay. That wouldn't work for you, because she challenged you to be your best you, even though she didn't agree with everything you have to say. Yeah. I was just telling my wife this. What?
Yeah, that's so true. My son was dating this woman in college. I liked her. I had a soft spot for her. I just liked her. I just could imagine my life as a father-in-law. But my wife and my mother-in-law were like, she doesn't challenge your son. She's not a challenging person. She's just a wilting willow. We don't think she's a good match for my oldest son long term. And she went away. My son broke up with her. And then his next girlfriend, they were like 2 thumbs up. Challenge, conflict, different opinions, strong woman, to use your words. And they were both like, yeah, this is a keeper. This should be a keeper. This woman, not the shrinking violet, but the strong woman.
So Sam, final words to you before we end the podcast.
So what more can he say?
Well, I think, as I read through the book, I think we have more common ground than we have disagreement. I think we believe a lot of the same things. It's just like the way I look at it like this. I mean, I live in Richmond. I work in Williamsburg, and I can get there 3 or 4 ways. but the issue is the destination, not the journey, as
Right.
far as the different ways. And I think at the end of the day, I think Wink wants the best thing that I want, and that is to see Black people in particular be their best selves, have opportunity to
Yes.
thrive and be whoever. I was telling my wife this morning, I said, Jerry, when I was a kid growing up in Roanoke, I never thought that I had the opportunity to be an assistant vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank or a state agency head, working
Right.
for 2 different governors, or even doing what I'm doing, or the fact that you are the, she's been the chief operating officer for 2 state agencies, and this third one, she's a director of finance.
Yeah.
We got married and met each other 37 years ago. That was not on the equation.
Mm.
And so we walked this path. We've seen our daughters, be successful, go to the best schools in Virginia, UVA, women marry. I mean, that, and then go on and one get, a doctorate, and the other one going to Georgetown. So yeah, we've lived this life as Black folks.
Amen.
So
Sam, it's been such a pleasure
it's been wonderful.
to get to know you. Hopefully we'll continue this conversation.
No question.
I'd love that.
You guys have a good evening, okay?
You too. I had fun, Sam.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye, y'all.
Take care. Bye.